On today's episode of Off Topic Talks, we've got two questions that I feel are going to take me a little bit longer than usual to answer, which is why I didn't go with more, because I don't want you to be stuck here watching me for 27 minutes straight trying to clear through 4 or 5 questions. These were two very good questions that came through, and I felt that they would be worth covering, as a lot of people will likely take some degree of value out of the responses, or so I hope. So the first question, that's why I don't have another phone today, because I can remember these two. At least I hope I can. The first question is, what would I do differently in my 20s looking back? Now, I understand the question, and I understand my receding hairline makes me look a little older, but I'm still in my 20s. Y'all are aging me too much, acting like I'm in my mid-30s or early 40s or something. Don't let the hairline fool you. I'm 26 years old, but I still understand the question, and I have lived through the majority, although slightly, of my 20s already. Looking back, what would I do differently? And I think that's a great question. And as you know, I do this off of the cuff, so I'm trying to think what exactly I would do differently in my 20s, or up to this point in my 20s, as opposed to what I've done so far. And, you know, there's so many things. Hindsight is 20/20. And I can look back and I can say, I would do that differently knowing what I know now. And I think that the trouble with looking back at what you've done, not realizing that the reason I am where I am today is a byproduct of all of those decisions collectively. If I didn't make those mistakes, then I look back at now and say, I wish I had done X instead of Y, or I wish I had turned right instead of left. The reality is I wouldn't even be here right now, and I'm really, really proud, not satisfied with where I am right now. So it's tough for me to answer, only because I consider the reality that if I had made a pivot in the other direction, even though it appears to me now from this perspective that it would be a more strategic decision, I wonder if it would have changed the path that I was on dramatically enough that I would have missed out on other mistakes or other victories that I made that led me to this current position. So, you know what? There's tons of little things along the way. There's tons of mini regrets that I have, missteps that I've made, mistakes and blunders that have cost me time, money, pride. But I can't say that there's anything so significant, so dramatic, that I feel that it has hindered my growth and development. I'm well aware that at 26 years old, I've achieved a lot more than most, actually a lot more than many ever will in their lives, let alone at this age. And there's definitely people that are absolutely crushing it in comparison. You know, they're doing what I'm doing at 21, 22. You know, their level of success as defined in a similar fashion to how I would define success is light years ahead of me. And I applaud those individuals, because the decisions they've made has led them to that point so early on. But looking back, you know, other than a few little missteps and adjustments that, you know, hindsight being 20/20, I would likely redo if I could go back with the current knowledge. I don't know if I actually would want to, only because I feel like it would change the outcome that I'm currently experiencing. I guess as an overview, one thing I would say though is that I would get out of my own way. I would get out of my own way. I think that this is a byproduct of not only being an entrepreneur, but also being a hyper-perfectionist, is that oftentimes I slow my own roll, for better or for worse. I feel personally that it's for worse. I think that my obsession with doing things to the highest standard works in my favor and allows me to open doors that I otherwise wouldn't be able to open. But at the same time, in a lot of scenarios, in a lot of situations, I do go to bed at night thinking, you know what? I think I held myself back on that one. I think I should have pulled the trigger sooner. I think I was more than adequately prepared, and I waited just a little bit too long. And I believe I'm getting better at that compared to when I was 18, 19 years old. I think with a little bit of maturity, although I'm certainly lacking in that department, I think that as I get a little bit older, as I become a little bit wiser relative to my experience in the industry and as a business owner, I am letting certain standards, I don't want to say slide because it has a bit of a negative undertone, but I'm creating a little more room to navigate, because sometimes rolling out an imperfect product or service allows you to at least get it out to the market, at least add value to the lives of others, and you can utilize the feedback coming your way to improve upon and make more efficient and effective what you're trying to deliver or provide in consideration of value add to the lives of others. So I think that would be my biggest general overview looking back, is get out of my own way. Get out of my own way, realize that perfect shouldn't be the aim. Standards should remain high always, and the ever constant pursuit of raising those standards is crucial in my personal opinion, but understanding that you don't have to be perfect to start. A product or service doesn't have to be perfect for release, for bringing to the market, and that if I got out of my own way, and moving forward, my advice to my future self is to get out of my way more often. I'm very confident that's going to open up so many more doors, so many more opportunities. It's going to allow us to reach so many more individuals, probably well into the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in the very near future. And further, it's going to allow us to develop so much more forward momentum in consideration of business growth and development. So that's a really good question, and philosophically, it's quite challenging to actually answer that. Yeah, I could give you not an exhaustive list, that would be impossible, but an attempt at an exhaustive list of 452 different mistakes I've made in the past 6 months. Little tedious missteps and blunders, and how I would correct them looking back, because I know now that I made a poor decision, or that I had a lesson learned, that having learned the lesson now, I wouldn't make the same mistake again. But like I said, those exact mistakes are what put me in this position today, and also what allows me to make sure that I don't burn myself on that same fire 2 times in a row. Unless, of course, I do it purposely, which isn't always the best plan, but sometimes it does happen. The fire's gonna burn, but you touch it anyways. I don't know, I do that sometimes. They say only a fool burns himself on the same fire twice. I'm not gonna deny, once in a while I'm a little bit foolish with my decisions. And the second question, also a great question. What are my general thoughts on an exercise science kinesiology degree? This came from Jared. So Jared, if you're watching, I think you might have sent I think you might have sent the first question too. I'm not entirely sure, but you definitely sent this one. So when it comes to an exercise science or kinesiology degree, I think that it's very valuable, but I think that the value has to be weighed against or in consideration of what your individual aims or goals are. I'll share with you a piece of advice I had, because even though I am a university dropout, I did initially attend university, and one of the classes I was taking was in fact kinesiology. And the prof asked me what my aim was. To give you a little bit of a background, I'm that guy in class where my hand goes up every 2 minutes. I'm curious, I want to learn. I have inquiries, right? And so one day after class, he was curious, what is your aim? You're very engaged, you're very interested in the stuff that we're learning. Where do you plan to go with this knowledge as you acquire it? And I said, honestly, I'd like to be a coach one day, if that's a reasonable career choice. And maybe one day own a gym. Not really knowing how quickly that would become a reality for me, but that was an aim. And I wasn't very certain that it was a possibility, only because it's not really considered to be a professional career to the degree that it can be. And so he said, you do realize you don't need this degree to do any of those things. And I was kind of caught off guard. And he said, there's certain professions you might go into, a physiotherapist, a chiropractor, and comparable fields, where this is definitely a prerequisite. He goes, but to be just a coach or personal trainer, and I don't mean like a high level coach that's working with athletic teams in a university or college setting, obviously there are going to be higher prerequisites going into that industry. But working in the private part of the fitness industry with clients who are considered to be general population, everyday people like yourself and I, assuming that you're not a professional athlete. The reality is that the standards are actually quite low to get in the door. And what he suggested was that I get my foot in the door and I determine whether or not I actually enjoyed the industry, and then to level up as I went along, which was very strange advice to me, considering it was coming from a professor. And his suggestion was, we'll always be here. You can always add on more qualifications as you need them. He goes, but one of the saddest things I see happen is people are overqualified for what they think they're going to love or enjoy. And when they get into the field itself, they realize they don't like it, or that they perceive it to be drudgery because it's not all it's cracked out to be. And he suggested to, as I just mentioned, get my foot in the door, determine if I do enjoy it, and then from there to acquire further and further education and certifications and increase my knowledge base as I go along relative to what I actually require to improve my service quality and professional skill set. Because I was very fortunate to have the aim of an industry with which the entrance standard was still quite low. And I took his advice. And so, pulling back towards your original question, my opinion is that it's a very valuable degree to have, and you're going to learn an incredible amount of information that is going to serve you professionally well, and it's also going to allow you to bring an entirely different degree of information and quality of service to the clients that you might work with in the future. The qualifier for me would be, what type of clients are you planning to work with, and what specific field, industry, sector in the fitness and health world are you aiming for? Because if it's not a prerequisite, not that being overqualified is bad, it's not necessarily an issue, but you might want to consider his advice where you get your foot in the door if you're simply looking to be a fitness coach or personal trainer in some capacity. Get your foot in the door and see if you like it first. Maybe get your foot in the door while you're still in school. Test the waters and see if it's what you thought it would be, or if it's in alignment with what you were hoping it would be. And if it is, great, continue with that education, level up, set yourself up above the majority of the industry, and bring a different degree of professionalism and a higher standard of service. But if you think you need it to get your foot in the door, you don't. You don't need it to get your foot in the door. So kind of a, playing devil's advocate there, where it's definitely something that's going to be beneficial, it's definitely going to help you out, and as you move forward in the industry, it's going to set you apart from competitors. But on the flip side, it's not required to start, and you might want to make sure you know what you're getting into, and you're fortunate enough to be able to trial run this industry, if you will, and determine if this is exactly where you can see yourself spending a significant portion of your life, that being that it would be a professional career choice for you. So I have many friends who have HK degrees who aren't even using them now because they got into the industry, and once they actually started working, realized that it really wasn't in alignment with what they wanted to do, or further, relative to the actual area of the industry that they wanted to get in, they now feel like they've spent so much time getting qualifications that they aren't even utilizing to the smallest degree, at least yet. So, just food for thought. It's always worthwhile to consider the big picture, and hopefully you consider that moving forward and understand that there are definitely parts of the industry or sections of the industry where you absolutely need to have that level of qualification. And if you think you're going to get in the door with anything less, realize that the industry is incredibly competitive. If you're going in to be a physiotherapist or a chiropractor or something along those lines, you need to be as qualified as you possibly can, because not only is the industry incredibly competitive, but there are prerequisites in play that require that. So again, figure out what your individual aim is. Once you've determined that, determine the most efficient and effective path you can take to get started in the industry, test the waters, determine if it's in alignment with your values, and then move forward from there, and never stop pursuing those continued education aims. Never stop adding to your resume. Never stop learning, whether it's in an organized setting such as university, college, etc., or if you're simply adding on additional continued education courses or attending seminars or reading books. That constant pursuit of information is only going to serve you well in the long term. And I'm a firm believer that the moment you stop learning, that is the same moment you start regressing as a professional. You start to lose your professional title, in my opinion, not literally, but you also begin to do a disservice to all of those individuals who trust in your expertise. So those are my 2 cents on the 2 topics. Jared for sure asked the second question. Like I said, he might have asked the first. Hopefully that offers you a little bit of insight on the topic. I realize that both of those answers were relatively open. They were not definitive black and white answers, and that's because I don't feel that either of those questions warranted it, but rather they warranted a response that offered clarity into my perspective on them. As per usual, if you aren't already, make sure you follow or subscribe depending on what social media platform you're seeing this video on. And if you have any questions, comments, relative curiosities that you'd like to see in an upcoming post, make sure you comment or shoot me a private message. And if I'm able to cover it, which especially on off-topic talks, as they tend to be more about business, lifestyle, professional development, etc., then you'll likely see it in an upcoming post.